So quality to me is trying to focus on foods from the ground up. A good way to do that is the 5-ingredient rule. Anytime you're looking at a food label, typically people look at sugars or calories or sodium or fat, but a lot of times ingredients are overlooked, and that's really where they need to focus on first. If it can come from the ground and you can wash it, cut it, cook it, and eat it, that's ideal. Is that practical always? Not always. So trying to focus on 5 ingredients or less as much as you possibly can, because again, going back to how we're going to break down and absorb things, if there's less processed ingredients in those foods, we're going to have a lot cleaner gut than anything else.
Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we are coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe your health is your most valuable asset. Your health is one of the biggest influencers of the quality and quantity of time that you have. And while there are many aspects of health, our expertise is exercise. Exercise has been proven time and again to not only improve your health, but also increase your longevity and improve your quality of life. But we know that exercise is not the only piece of the puzzle, and that is why we are bringing you a rock star guest today, none other than Megan Renfree. Megan Renfree is the owner of Embolden Wellness. She is an integrative and functional registered dietitian, certified personal trainer, as well as a National Academy of Sports Medicine behavior change specialist. Megan resides in Cary, Illinois with her husband, 2 daughters, ages 2.5 and 1 year old, as well as 2 dogs, a chocolate lab and a golden retriever. Her hobbies include cooking, anything outdoors and sports, and quality time with family and friends, such as taking walks, going to the park, and traveling. Megan, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to our show.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, so tell us more about yourself, because being an integrative and functional registered dietitian, I have never met anybody with that title. So tell us more about that and how you got from kind of your early education to where you are now.
It certainly didn't start out that way. You know, some people grow up and they're 5 years old knowing they want to be whatever they decide to be in their career path. And I think when I was 5, I wanted to be an ice cream lady. So that ended up a complete different route where I ended up going.
That's when your parents are like, don't pursue your passions.
Don't follow that ice cream truck all the time. Yeah, so it really started, it was about 2003 when my cousin, at the time she was 9 years old, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And that's when I was truly interested or introduced to dietetics, or what a registered dietitian was. In my adolescent and adult years, I always knew I wanted to be in the health field, but I wasn't quite sure what. And we went to the hospital to visit her when she was initially diagnosed, because she had extremely high blood sugars. And at 9, you don't know what that means, and it wasn't in our family and so forth. So it was all pretty scary for all of us. We went in, and I remember this lady walking in with this tray of plastic fruit with this just cheerful demeanor, walking in ready to teach us, and the whole family was in the room. My new aunts, cousins, like uncles, grandma, everyone. And she was just ready to teach us how you count your carbohydrates and how your insulin and how nutrition can truly be powerful, and you can live with this and you can manage it, and this is how you do it. And it just brought a cheerful demeanor to our whole room, and that's really where I was truly introduced to it.
Very neat. So how did that experience then kind of translate into, it clearly influenced what you wanted to do going forward, but going through high school and into college, the classes you took and what you've kind of decided to pursue now? Yeah,
so I went to Bradley University in Peoria, and they have a food, nutrition, dietetics major degree there. So that's what I was there for. I think I started within physical therapy and athletic training, and that was originally where I started, just because I was an athlete and early on knew that wasn't the route I wanted to do as my career. But then thinking back to my story in 2003 and that memory that I had, and realizing Bradley had that major, it was just an easy decision for me after that.
That's awesome.
So went there and then did my dietetic internship in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I was there for 10 months, passed my exam, and started working at Lifetime, which is where I met Julie. Held multiple different roles there: nutrition team lead, lab testing specialist, health course specialist, training department head, assistant department head. But that is truly where I got into the functional side of things.
Yeah.
So an integrative and functional dietitian, all dietitians in the whole practice have practice groups, which some are sports specific, some are diabetic specific, but something that I wanted to focus on was the dietitians in integrative and functional medicine. So it was a didactic group that I joined early on in my career, and it's just an area that it gets you connected to different varieties of education, as well as specialties that can allow you to focus more on foods from the ground up rather than calorie counting and label reading, but more the ingredient side of it than anything else, and the power of food, truthfully.
So the didactic group, was that like an educational resource, or was that
Yes.
okay, all right, I was imagining almost like a separate practice, but you say you were still at Lifetime when you got introduced to this, or was
Yes.
that after?
While I was at Lifetime is where I originally got introduced to it.
Okay.
I opened my practice in 2016, and that's just really where I felt like it was the right timing for me to jump into doing integrative and functional on my own, and then using many other tools and resources and other functional practitioners to be just part of my resources.
Very cool.
So
I do want to, I think our direction will be for sure today about what you do today and your practice today. But I had a question, because I feel like nutrition and food is kind of this big field, kind of like exercise, where everyone can kind of be, an advice giver and things get muffled down. Can you tell us about what is it being a dietitian? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And can you compare that to other stuff that's out there? Like, I've heard of nutritionists, and I've heard of, people that are not labeled as anything food related, meaning dietitian or nutritionist, and they give food advice, or people that are selling food things. Tell us about what is dietitian, and how does that compare to the rest of the realm of nutrition advice givers?
Yeah, absolutely. There's obviously, as you know, there's so many different certificates out there that people can get, or classes that they can take in college that are nutrition focused. And technically, you really only need something like that realm to become a nutritionist, or call yourself a nutritionist, or give nutrition advice. People give nutrition advice and don't have any of that, and it doesn't mean that it's wrong at all. The big thing that dietitians have that really set themselves apart is they're licensed. So after you graduate with your degree, you have to complete and pass a dietetic internship. And when I was going through it was about a 50% success rate of people who get in right away. Otherwise you wait.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So it's a pretty demanding field. A lot of people, it's getting a lot more popular now too, but you can't really start truly practicing as a registered licensed dietitian until you pass the licensure exam. So that's the big difference. You're licensed through the state. When you move, you get licensed through a whole nother state, and it's not just a certification, or the specialties are additional things that can help you get into different areas, but the licensure is like what just holds it down. That's just your main starting point.
Sure, yeah.
So there must be a lot of professionals out there that are giving advice on how you should eat that don't have this, I'm assuming. Because I don't know, I think you're the only dietitian that I know.
Yeah.
Everyone else is like
Possible.
nutritionist, or I took the class over the weekend for 8 hours, and so that's really cool. What did you have to learn in this internship? Like, were you exposed to like all different levels, like hospital stuff and all of it? So you have like a good experience with it.
Oh yeah. At the time it was broken up into 3 different categories. It was clinical, which was primarily hospitals, wellness, which was out in the community, food stamps and education and things like that, and food service. That was the 3 areas. I always knew that food service wasn't necessarily my route. Even though I love cooking, it just wasn't really my route. Clinical, I felt at the time, and things may have changed now, that I would be a little bit strapped with my ability to branch into the functional realm, because traditional dietitians, and I'm sure it's changed, there can't be too many dietitians in a clinical setting or at a hospital giving you different advice or focusing more on the quality of things, because a lot of it at that time is in a disease state. Sure. And what I didn't necessarily like, or it wasn't as much of a fuel for me, was you meet them once and you go to there, you get a trigger in your computer, go to hospital room 205 and educate on so-and-so, but then there's no follow-up, and I don't know how they're doing and how I can help them. And that's when I always truly knew I wanted to do like a private practice, or the health club is where, we started, and go from there. going from there.
Yeah, that's really cool. So the integrative and functional aspect of everything, what was it about that? Because there are, I'm guessing, dietitians that open a private practice or, work in a health club that don't necessarily do the integrative and functional side of things. How is that different than just kind of a standard dietitian practice? And how did that education kind of go above and beyond what you learned in your internship and your undergrad work?
Great question. I believe it's evolved because at the time, a lot of nutrition was focused more on quantity, like looking at your calories and based off your height and weight, this is what you should be striving for. And I'll get to this a little later too, but my true philosophy is quality first, balance is second, which is incorporating macronutrients and making sure you're eating the right amount of carbohydrates to proteins to fats with what your goal is, and quantity is last. So that's like, I'd say if we're comparing the two, I'd say that's really where it differs, is really where it just made sense to me. When you're looking at ingredients and there's a slew of things that you can't pronounce and you don't know what they are, but the calories are 100 calorie pack, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure.
It just made sense to me, and that's really where I wanted to make that transition and focus on quality with people as much as I could.
Very cool.
So tell us about your company today. I know it's called Embolden Wellness.
Yeah.
So tell us about it. How did you get started? What's going on with it? What kind of people are you working with?
So it's been open. I opened the LLC like early 2017, and I just took some time as a small business owner doing my website. And at the time I had a 6-month-old, so that was my priority.
Sure.
And then just getting my business, I wanted to make sure it was prepped and the website was running and it looked my style and it was everything that I envisioned it being. So I took time to really do that. In May is when I officially started my first client. That's when I first opened. Of 2017. So it hasn't even been open 2 years, but primarily weight management. That's what, I typically see, because that's what most people think of when they think dietitian or nutrition or fitness or whatever it may be. But it encompasses so many realms. Like weight management to me, there's so much more to it. And when you really dig deeper, it's more than just weight management or a weight goal, or there's other things that we can focus on which will only help improve that side of it. So things that I work on with a lot of people and specialties are gut health is a big focus of mine, adequate meal planning and prepping, autoimmune disorders, cognitive decline, and ketogenic diets is something that I'm really getting into as of late. Food intolerances and allergies, as well as elimination diets. I do that quite a bit. Pregnancy, sport-specific, adolescent wellness, and then pediatric nutrition.
Very interesting. So gut health is a topic that we've briefly kind of skimmed the surface of a little bit on this podcast with a couple different of our guests, in that the importance of it has been brought up. But from a kind of a dietitian standpoint, what's your take on gut health? Like, what are some of the bigger things that might be influencing somebody's gut health, might be breaking somebody's gut health down, or that they could do to kind of help build it up?
Oh, yeah. So food obviously plays a powerful role in that, because it directly goes through our gut. I really try to help people focus on the ingredients in their foods, because if they can read it and they understand what it is, your body, for the most part, is understanding of how to break it down and absorb it in the system. If we don't, it's not like we have enzymes to break down processed foods. But that doesn't necessarily mean part of it isn't getting absorbed into our gut or creating inflammation along the way. Some gets excreted, but not all of it. So I truly believe that 70%, argue maybe up to 80% of our immunity lies within our gut.
Wow.
So if we can fuel our gut with the proper foods, maybe some probiotics, good quality, different strains, a good parts per billion base, that can be really beneficial for people. And
when you say gut, what do you like? I think stomach, but does it incorporate more than the stomach?
Yeah, I jumped then into the small intestine of where like absorption truly happens. Okay. That's like that and gut health. And then just, of course, the breakdown of everything. So starting right in your mouth, where we start breaking down enzymes or releasing enzymes. So all of that, as optimal as you can possibly feel, that's what I want to try to help people with.
Very cool.
So talk to us a little about this concept that you brought up. Like, most people come to you for weight management. It's like, if I'm overweight, I should probably, focus on my food. And so people normally think about food and exercise, right? But there are ways that you can really manage your weight and or lose weight that are fairly unhealthy. Can you talk to us about how your approach may highlight health more than just, you know, what we might see out there with like, oh, count the calories and cut the weight. And, you know, if you're way less, then you're healthier. But can you talk to us about that? Because I've seen people that are pretty thin and pretty unhealthy, or they count calories and they're pretty unhealthy, and people that count calories and are pretty healthy. So where do you see that like differences in there?
Yeah. So I think to everyone it's a little different, first of all. The way that I do it is I'm very upfront with people in the beginning. So my process, and everyone that I work with, it starts with a consultation, whether that's over the phone or in person. However, we can get in to just discuss what they're trying to achieve. And it's a lot of times thrown around the questioning that I bring up while in that initial consultation. That one could be anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes, but it sets a tone for what my programming, and then the next appointment, which is my big like 90+ minute assessment screening session. That is, I just basically talk to them about, you might have a 30-pound weight loss goal, but there's realistically more to it, that we can help make sure that this weight comes off, not in the short term and not really super fast, because that's a lot of times not the way you want to do it anyway. You want it to be slow, sustainable, and all really along the way, it's building habits. It's all about habit building, which is why I added this most recent specialty I have, which is behavior change specialist. So I found that, you know, I can write meal plans, which aren't super beneficial for people, and say, okay, good luck, never see you again. But I don't find the fuel in that either. I don't see that passion, because I'm not allowing to coach them. I'm not allowing to I'm not basically setting them up for success when I just give them something like calories. If someone's individually motivated and they're counting calories, it's really awareness is what they're bringing. That's a great thing. Into what individually what people need, it's a lot of times different for each person. But what I really try to do is just bring more awareness around the whole realm of wellness. And it's not just eating, and it's not just exercise. There's your sleep, there's your stress, so on and so forth. So
yeah. And you see people that focus on one level of awareness, like you said, counting calories, which is a cool way to bring awareness to maybe amounts. But then you see also people that are like, I'm all about the macros, you know, and they don't know about calories, but all they do is like, so here's my macro bar. I'm like, what does that mean? Every bar has macros in it. Like, I don't know what that means. So that's cool that you're kind of taking that more well-rounded, wholesome approach, because it is true. It's like weight loss can be really frustrating, I think. But if you have a plan where it's like, this is sustainable and I can do it, even if it's slow, I think if people see progress, then that's really what they're looking for. So cool.
Yeah.
So what does your giant assessment entail? Like what do you assess for 90 minutes? Is it hormone levels? Is it, you know, are you drawing blood? Is it saliva stuff? What kind of goes on during that assessment?
So I always speak with them first, again, whether it's in person or over the phones, just set the tone for it. It's at least 90 minutes, sometimes more, and I'm getting more in depth with it now that I've branched out into this behavior change specialization. But it's anywhere between 2 forms if it's fairly simple and it's self-explanatory for what they need. There's a lot of self-motivation in that side, to 6+ forms that I have them fill out. So recently what I've been getting back is 20+ pages of assessment forms from clients for me to review before I sit down with them. So like hormones and lab testing, if they have that, that's not even a part of my forms that I send to them. But if they have it, I want them to attach it, because it's only going to help me understand what's going on underneath the hood.
Yeah.
Something that we had talked about previously was, how do you make it individualized to people? Well, this assessment is how I do it. It's really the starting point for everything for me. And I always, after I do it, I don't have a selling pitch or anything afterwards, because I take time to review it all. I'll take days to just soak it all in, come up with my recap, my recommendations, and send it out to them and go from there. And we can get another call or meet in person again to review it, to figure out the best route for them. But it incorporates everything. I mean, all their habits, to their meal timing, to their prepping, to their support, their resources, their confidence. I mean, where their commitment lies, what are they fearful of? A number of things, but on top of it, the medical side of it.
Sure.
Their lab testing, any recent labs, really, I'd say anything within the last year, but anything more recent than that would be great. Supplementation, medications that they take, any reports from their physicians, all of it can help.
Yeah. So you brought up earlier that the idea with the integrative kind of functional dietitian, or at least that aspect of it, looking at kind of quality, secondly balance, and third quantity. And You talked about kind of counting calories as bringing awareness, and people do that a lot when they're trying to lose weight. Do you find that when people are trying to lose weight, that actually the order needs to be quality, balance, quantity?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
And I'll jump into that because I have a little spiel that helps people understand what I mean by that. So quality to me is trying to focus on foods from the ground up. Mm-hmm. A good way to do that is just a tip that I usually tell people is the 5 ingredient rule. Okay. So anytime you're looking at a food label, typically people look at sugars or calories or sodium or fat, but a lot of times ingredients are overlooked, and that's really where they need to focus on first. If it can come from the ground and you can wash it, cut it, cook it, and eat it, that's ideal. Is that practical always? Not always. So trying to focus on 5 ingredients or less as much as you possibly can, because again, going back to how we're going to break down and absorb things, if there's less processed ingredients in those foods, we're going to have a lot cleaner gut than anything else. Mm-hmm. So the quality of your food, while yes, that's going to help with weight loss, more importantly, it's going to help your gut, which is going to help everything else just function more efficiently.
Sure.
Okay, and you're going to feel better because you're going to get more energy, you're going to absorb more foods, and so on. So balance is my macronutrients. So you've got your macronutrients and you got your micronutrients on scale of what you need every single day to live. Macronutrients, think large, your proteins, your carbs, and your fats. Micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. Of course, we need water and air and all that to live as well. But on the nutrition side, my balance is mostly making sure we're getting our micronutrients in, getting enough water intake, but where macro counting comes into play, there's not a set percentage that I just say strive for this for weight loss, because it depends on where their exercise intake is or their exercise prescription is at this point, what their day-to-day routine is like, what their sleep routine, I mean, the list goes on. So that assessment will help me determine where we're going to start with their macronutrient balance, but my whole goal out of it is that we become fat burning efficient. So if we're eating too many carbohydrates and we're not burning them off for fuel, that can be stored as fat. And our blood sugars are going to be a little bit more elevated. So our fat burning essentially is not going to be very efficient. A lot of times people don't come to me and say they want to lose weight and they want to lose muscle. That's usually not the goal. It's usually body fat.
Yeah.
So that's really where balance comes into play, and why I think it's more important than quantity is, but quantity is still equally important within the equation somewhere, because we can't just drop our calories too low, because then we might start just taking from our muscle regardless of the good choices that we're making. So quantity is important to me, but I never give someone a set caloric amount. I'll give them a range, like try not to go under this range and try to stay underneath this range. Still trying to achieve your macronutrient balance, and that adjusts based off of their achievements and their progress. We always make adjustments through that within coaching sessions and so forth. But primarily then coming back to quality, it's all around good foods.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
With the quality, actually when I first met you, that was the first time I ever heard that, and it seems like it makes sense. Like, well, I should eat food that's food, and I remember you saying something like that to me, and I was like, oh, really? But you know what? I think that I definitely, and we probably all do, we come from this background of like, we come from the 90s where everything is modified, and I'm sure it was all modified before then, but everything's like low fat or modified this or packaged that. And, I was taught like, hey, just don't eat too much, and that's how you don't gain too much weight. But what I've learned in just starting to eat more wholesome, and I'm curious if you see this all the time too in your practice, is like the more real food I eat, the more I'm able to like listen to my body and actually feel like when I'm actually hungry and when I'm like fake hungry or I'm just snacking because I'm bored. Because I feel like when you're eating like these chemically foods that have no real ingredients, or there's one identifiable ingredient, you might feel full, but it feels different than if you had a real meal of like just one item of food.
Oh yeah, you're gonna feel way more satiated or full for a longer period of time when you get all of the nutrients absorbed in your system and not excreted out, or 50% of it gets excreted, or there's really no way of knowing how much you're truly getting. But yeah, wholesome foods go a long way, and you really essentially eat. A lot of people feel like when I create a plan for them or like a guideline for them, that they're like, whoa, that's a lot of food. But I'm like, trust me, it's good quality foods. And then you're going to start listening to your body. So what I have outlined for you may only eat a portion of it, but you're still going to feel way better from doing this and building up that tolerance to, your body's just not used to eating all the wholesome foods. You're going to be full.
Yeah.
So when you talk to your clients about like these 3 foundations, of like quality, balance, and then quantity, I'm wondering, do people still bring up to you like, well, what about this diet? Because I mean, the social media world, the, you know, internet world, the on the news world is like filled with all these things like, oh, you got to try the keto diet. Oh, you got to try the Atkins diet. Oh, are you doing South Beach diet? So how do you deal with these, and what kinds of thoughts go through your brain when you're working with someone that's coming in with these perspectives of like, hey, maybe I should try this out, you know?
Yeah, so absolutely. People ask questions all the time in regards to fads or diets. And I try to find the positive in all of them, or the practical reasoning behind why diets are, what they promote. So I actually decided to talk about a couple today that are very common that people hear and maybe aren't sure if it's actually right for them or so forth. So the first one I want to talk about is gluten-free. I get a lot of questions on, is gluten-free a fad? I mean, everyone feels like they're doing it, and there's a lot of...
Big deal now.
It is. So my thoughts around it is that gluten-free can be very powerful for people. It does not mean that each of the three of us right here, not all of us might need to be gluten-free, but I do recommend that all of us at some point cut gluten out. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is that if you eliminate it and reintroduce it, it can be very powerful to figure out if your body has an issue to it. But if you're constantly eating it, you're living with potential symptoms that are coming from gluten, but don't know that it's coming from gluten because you're consuming it on a daily basis on top of everything else that you're already consuming.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
So a lot of people have gluten intolerances. Mm-hmm. Most people do not know that they have them, but it can be powerful by cutting it out, decreasing gut inflammation from it, and basically healing your gut from eating something that is creating any inflammatory response, since a lot of our gluten today is refined. Not all of it, but a lot of it is. And reintroducing it can be a powerful source because it can tell you, okay, I just don't feel good. I broke out. My gut doesn't feel great. My energy was really down after I ate something like that. My sleep was poor, whatever it may be. So I do believe gluten-free can be powerful for people. At some point, I do believe people should do some form of an elimination, whether it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, longer if they feel, but cut themselves from it and see how their body responds to it.
Yeah. It's almost like chop it out, let your body chill for a second, and then see. I think, you know, one thing that Charlie and we talk about a lot is, especially when we're like driving in the car, this might be bad to share, but we're driving in the car and we see someone eating like fast food, and I'm like, how do you eat that? Like, you know, because Charlie and we never eat it. It's just like, if I think about it, it's like, oh, like I'd rather be fasting than eat that. And one thing that we kind of think is that sometimes people have never tried anything that actually makes them feel good. So they've never done something, they have no comparisons. It's almost like you're giving them a comparison of like, hey, let's chop this gluten out and just see. I mean, it's 4 weeks. Can you handle 4 weeks without it? And then we'll put it back in to see. So I like that approach. That's really cool. Yeah. And it's pretty non-invasive too. I mean, it's just chop it out, put it back in.
Yeah, and there's a strategic way you'd want to bring it back in. Like it's surrounded around, I get a lot of my elimination diet thoughts or concepts around the Institute of Functional Medicine. And they cut out, they do a 3-4 week process, but it's more than gluten. And it's a slew of things that it's like a kind of like a detox of potential inflammatory harmful foods. But gluten alone is so popular nowadays with the term gluten-free. So even if you just do that alone, it can be daunting for even 4 weeks for people. I mean, you wouldn't think that that's very long, but it can be for people, especially if there's not really a plan in place for prepping or planning. It can be daunting. So even 2 weeks can be powerful.
Sure.
Nice.
So keto was another one that I wanted to talk about. Ketogenic.
Keto's big right now.
Yes. So I subcontract and I work with a functional physician in Arlington Heights. Her name is Dr. Lori Goldman. Clear Path Wellness is her company. And where ketogenic, I believe, can be very beneficial is with cognitive decline. That's not the only area it can be beneficial. I want to make sure I say that. There's so many varieties of ketogenic diets, and there's really healthy ways of doing it, and there's unhealthy ways of doing it, but still truly staying within the ketogenic term, which is really using ketone bodies for fuel, is what that means. When your body limits the amount of sugars in your body, basically, your body is going to be forced to create ketone bodies, which is using that as a fuel source. So there's a lot of physicians out there releasing research on how the ketogenic diet can be very beneficial for people on early onset Alzheimer's and so forth. But really starting to notice some cognitive decline. Dr. Dale Bredesen is a big one right now, who released the book The End of Alzheimer's. So that's a really popular one, but it's all around a ketogenic diet. It's some other things, but the nutritional side of it is really focusing on a lot of healthy fats in good quality form as much as you can. And then where I feel like is missed within ketogenic diet are the vegetables.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's such a powerful piece of the ketogenic diet. The non-starchy vegetables, which really aren't spiking your blood sugar much, is something that's very lost because people think, well, it's still carbohydrate. I'm just going to focus on eating a bunch of meats and I'm going to eat a bunch of fats and bacon and so forth. And when you eat even proteins, your body can still release sugar into the bloodstream. So it's really taking the ketone bodies out of it. You're not being as efficient as you could when you do it. So non-starchy vegetables, I feel like, is really lost within a ketogenic diet. So it can be very powerful.
So what are some examples of non-starchy vegetables? I mean, when you say starchy vegetables, I think like potatoes. And so is it like everything else aside from potatoes?
I think potatoes, period. That's all I know. And carrots.
So your main starchy ones are potatoes, peas, and corn. That's your main starch. But then there's other like vegetables that like carrots. It's going to be a little bit more sugar content than eating spinach, you know?
Okay.
But I generally say overall, like your starchies are your peas, corn, potatoes. Those, I don't even really, they're vegetables, yes, but I don't really consider them vegetables. I consider them starches.
Gotcha.
When I'm looking at like my macronutrient balancing for people. So really anything other than your higher sugar ones, I'm okay with because I want you to consume a variety of them. So branching out and trying a new one every week or every day if you're really excited about it.
Nice.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's truly lost within the ketogenic diet because you're missing a lot of the micronutrient side of it.
Can you talk also, so you define that one, can you also talk about this good and bad fats?
Yeah.
Because that is a weird one right now, and I think a lot of people are like, well, I'm eating good fats, which is almonds. Like, that's all people label as good fats, and I'm like, I don't even know if that's a good fat. I'm not educated on it, and avocados. I'm eating almonds and avocados. Is that good? So talk to us about that.
So I believe so when I say this, it's not going to sound like very many good fats, but within this, there's a lot of variety. So we'll start with avocados, great, good, healthy fat. Nuts and seeds. There's a huge variety within that people don't realize. They think almonds and that's all they need to consume, but there's so many nuts and seeds. Just like the non-starchy vegetable comment, I mean, I don't really care if macadamia nuts might have a little bit more saturated fat, but they're still healthy fats and they're coming from good quality form. So
I was going to say they're wholesome, like from the ground up, like you were saying.
Exactly. I just promote a variety. So you've got avocado, nuts and seeds, oils, which there's a slew of different oils. Overall, I generally say extra virgin olive oil and like all unrefined versions is what I want people to strive for. Is really good for cold application, meaning I wouldn't heat it as much as you can, try to keep away from that because it can transform into not as healthy of a variety of fat as you would if in just its normal application. For cooking, avocado oil can be really good unrefined coconut oil can be really good, and ghee, like a good quality, basically lactose-free butter. It's like the healthiest version of butter that you're going to find out there. Can also be a good quality fat to use for cooking. So you got oils, you got nuts and seeds, you got avocado. Olives are also healthy fats. That's another variety.
Love olives.
I hate olives.
Charlie hates olives.
Yeah, I mean, there's more out there, but those are, when you think of it, there's a big variety within that people often just choose the almonds because they know those are healthy. They've got a lot of unsaturated fats. They've got benefit within that. But again, it comes back to the variety. I want you to get more than just one source of fat because you can create intolerances, food intolerance to things if you just eat the same thing over and over and over again. And regardless of the quality of the foods that you're consuming, if you just fuel the same thing over and over again and you have some gut inflammation, your body can fight against it in essence. So variety is key.
So you named a lot of fats that are, I'm not going to say they're not vegetable based, but they're, like you're saying, the oils, the nuts. What about fats from like animal protein?
Yeah.
From, whether it's red meat or chicken thighs or something like that. Is there still, quality fat within that, or is that something to be more leery of?
So there's the thought process of saturated fat is bad. Stay away from it. There's 4 fats. There's unsaturated fat in poly and mono variety. So monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated fat, and trans fat. The only fat that I really want people staying away from is trans fat. So I do want people consuming saturated fat. And there isn't like a percentage of how much saturated to unsaturated I want you to focus on. I don't certainly want all your fats coming from just saturated. I want a variety, just like anything else, for many purposes. But yeah, I'm okay with animal meats and fats from animal proteins. I would strive for it to be as high quality as you can find, and looking for grass-fed beef, and that's going to make the saturated fat content be a lot less and a lot better quality for you. Free range poultry, as much as you can find, wild caught fish, it's going to make a big difference. It makes a big difference.
And I always feel like you can taste the difference. Like,
big time.
If you've never, there's some people that are really like anti-organic. They're like, oh, it's just overpriced, or, you know, grass-fed. I'm like, I mean, if you taste, for example, like Charlie's family, they have a cattle farm, and we get our grass-fed and finished beef from there. I'm like,
I'm going to have to call them.
Yeah.
This stuff is like way different than what you buy. Even we get grass-fed beef at, you know, at the store. It just tastes so different. And so not that my experience should dictate what really is happening, but it makes me feel like, okay, something's definitely different here. This is not what I'm getting at the grocery store. This is like, you know, wholesome meat that's treated well, and they're not stressed out, and they're just fed grass their whole life. So it just makes me think it has to be so different.
Oh yeah, I always use the example of like humans. Okay, so what if we just ate corn and grains all day long and weren't necessarily using it as a fuel source, and just completely neglected grass or greens in our case? I mean, our compositions would be different too. So it's the same thing. It's just we don't regularly check cholesterol on a cow. That's just really a big difference.
Yeah.
Sure.
Another one that I like to talk about, which is very popular, is called the paleo diet, which comes from the Paleolithic era.
Sure.
Right? If you are, you know, basically if the cavemen didn't eat it, we shouldn't eat it, is basically the concept. I'd say if I create my plans or my concepts around anything, it's probably closest to this, because it still is quality food. That's really what it promotes. You've heard of the Whole30, the whole plan within the paleo diet, which is, it's very similar to an elimination diet, which is what I do with a lot of people, which is eliminating those triggers and reintroducing them. Now, what I think is lost a lot of times within the Whole30 is, I did my 30 days and I'm going to just go back to my habits. Right. But there's actually a really strategic plan there. Is you do your 30 days, but you reintroduce one at a time. I always say one at a time every 3 days, one food. So let's say you choose dairy. Well, dairy, there's a category of things. You got cheese, you got yogurt, you got milk, you got ice cream, and so forth. You can't do them all at once, because you may have a reaction to one, but not necessarily the other. So it's very strategic. It ends up being longer than 30 days, and it's not necessarily promoted that way, but if you're doing it the right way, it's where you can really find the power of what foods are doing to your system. So I really like the paleo thoughts. It's just focused on good quality foods. I think, again, it gets lost and people just think I'm going to eat meat all day, but it's you got to eat your vegetables. You got to eat non-starchy micronutrients. You've got to eat a good balance. You got to get your healthy fats in. You do have to eat carbs. I mean, I believe that they're beneficial. And so, yeah.
I was going to say that one sounds the most like eating from the ground up. Like you're just thinking, this is real food, so I'm eating it because it's real, you know?
Exactly.
And of course, there's probably a lot of more details than that, but I like that concept a lot.
Yes, that's a lot of times what I promote to people, or like cookbooks that I recommend are very often like paleo style cookbooks, even though I'm not ever really pinpointing people should be on this diet unless it's very specific for a reason.
Sure.
And then another piggyback off of the paleo is called the paleo AIP diet, which is the autoimmune protocol diet, which is basically paleo on steroids. It adds like all the paleo concepts, and then it cuts out nightshades, and it cuts out some other things that can be also inflammatory for people. Just a little bit more strict version of what the Whole30 is, and it just adds some more things in there that can be inflammatory to people that they would never really think about, like tomatoes or peppers or eggplant and things like that.
Nice. Very cool.
It's like a piggyback also on the elimination idea.
Exactly.
So it's like, let's just figure out what is causing you issues.
That's why I'd say that diet itself, paleo AIP. I like the keto concept, like just having more healthy fats and being able to be more of a fat burner. You can't really burn fats without eating fat.
So if somebody were to come to you and say, hey, you know what, I definitely need some nutritional guidance, and yes, you'd send them all the forms and whatnot, but let's say it's one of our listeners right now, and they're thinking, okay, I'm edging in the right direction of feeling like I'm doing the right things with my nutrition, but I don't feel like I'm completely dialed in. Megan, do you have any advice as far as what people could do, maybe like 3 things or something, to kind of zero themselves in from a health and wellness perspective, looking through the nutritional lens?
Absolutely. So I feel like there's many habits I can get people started on, but I find that simplifying them and having them start with a couple at a time or even one at a time is important. So the first one I absolutely get people started on, and one of my first questions is water intake. How many ounces of just straight water are they consuming a day? For an active individual, I want them drinking at least half their body weight in ounces a day. So for instance, a 200-pound person should be drinking about 100 ounces of water daily. Most people aren't consuming that amount of water, so that's where I'd say first start there, okay? Next would be determine your ideal prep and planning schedule. Everyone's is a little different, and generally when I'm starting a new client or patient out, it is, let's figure that out, and it could be trial and error, but 3 general ideas are a one-day prep where Saturday or Sunday they do all their planning and prepping, the Tupperware it out throughout the whole week, and all your meals are set and put in the fridge and you just take them out each day. That's common. People do that. It's just not realistic for some people. And the other 2, next one would be 2-day prep. So they still do all their planning on the weekend, Saturday or Sunday if they work weekends. It doesn't matter really what day it is, but it's 1 day of planning and 2 days of prep. So it could be Sunday, Wednesday. So you do Sunday and Wednesday night's a good night for you, but you prep everything for 3-4 days in a row, and then it's all ready and Tupperware it out.
Nice.
That's a common one that I have people do.
Cool.
And the other one is nightly prep that I have people focus on. And there's other varieties, but these are the 3 most common I find, where if you're home in the evenings, breakfast could be a smoothie. You can make that in the morning or whatever it may be, or it's quick to consume or prep. In the evenings, you make your dinner, but you make enough for lunch the next day. So it's nightly prep, and that's your lunch the next day.
Yeah, I like
and
that.
your snacks can be, it's on-the-fly type of things that you can grab, but you have to have the planning involved and the food's purchased so that's available to you.
That's awesome.
So instead of grabbing a granola bar, you might have a fruit or a vegetable that's
nuts
ready.
and seeds or avocado. Yeah, absolutely. And then the third one I'd say for just people starting out is focus on the 5-ingredient rule.
Cool.
So when you're going grocery shopping, focusing on ingredients first. If it has, and this is just a rule of thumb, because it could be all 5 processed ingredients, but if it's got more than 5 ingredients, try to put it back. Or if you can't pronounce them, you don't know what they are, you don't know what it is, then it's a good idea to just put it back. If it's got less than 5 ingredients, you're doing very well in the quality department. And kind of piggybacking off of that, trial and elimination diet. It doesn't have to be a slew of foods. It could be just gluten. It could be just dairy. It could be tomatoes. Whatever you feel like may be creating some issues, and you might not know that. So eliminating could really give you some answers and be powerful.
Nice. That's awesome. Those are 3 great tips. I know we employ the prepping every week, and it makes a huge difference. Huge difference.
And it takes a lot of stress off of us.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's like when you're working or if you're any person that's busy, which is everyone, things come up and you're like, oh, oops, didn't have time to go to the grocery store. But if you knew it was part of the schedule, then it happens.
So that's what our listeners can do to improve their health and wellness. But I'm curious, what do you do to work on your own health and wellness?
So for me, it's the planning and prepping. That is, I've got 2 young kids, 2 young girls. So I can easily see how people would make the excuse, well, I just don't have time. My kids are picky or whatever it may be. And those are all, I never neglect people's reasoning. I understand that. But it has been a staple since forever for me and my family. And that is the first and foremost. There's meal planning and prepping, but I involve them in it. My 1-year-old doesn't quite know what's going on, but she does like to ride the car cart at the grocery stores and things like that. But my 2.5-year-old, it's routine. She likes to come with me. She, if I'm cooking, my routine is nightly prep. If I'm home in the evening, which is majority when I'm with my family, I'll prep and make enough throughout for the next day, even for my husband and so forth.
Sure.
So that's just a routine that works, but she likes cooking with me. She likes being and doing it with me and being a part of that.
That's awesome.
So that's something that is big for us.
Very cool.
Water is a big thing for my whole family, even my girls. They drink lots of water. They
even
take
brought
supplements.
Your water.
Yes.
Bring it with me everywhere. Supplements for my girls too. That's a big part of it. It doesn't have to be 2 giant handfuls of supplements, but your basics, that's something that we do. And then movement. And my thoughts, we met at Lifetime. So my thoughts on exercise and fitness has changed since I've had kids. And it doesn't mean that I don't believe in gyms. And I do totally get that. I totally understand, and I see the purpose of personal training. Obviously I am. But for me, it's just being active.
Sure.
That is like being movement. It doesn't necessarily what you're doing. I want people to be active.
Yeah.
I want them to move. I don't want them to be sedentary. So those are probably the three main things that I incorporate with my family and I do myself, and it's just a staple.
That's awesome. It's really cool that you're getting your kids involved at such a young age, and like you're saying, kind of building those habits and making that the norm that they're accustomed to. So that's really cool. Yeah. Very neat. So Megan, how can our listeners get in contact with you? Let's say they're listening to this and like, oh, you know what? I think I can make it over to, the Arlington Heights office. How can they connect with you to not only learn more about what you do, but possibly set up a consultation, go through the assessment, and get some dietary advice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a website. It's www.emboldenwellness.com. There's a direct link that you can click for just sign up for a consult. That comes into my email as an inquiry, so that's an easy way to do it. My email address is mrenfree@emboldenwellness.com. It's another way of doing it. And then I have a Facebook and I have an Instagram page, just Embolden Wellness LLC, so they can visit me there and see anything that I've got going on and reach out. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, we will be sure to link to all of those in the show notes, so people will be able to find it super easy. So the question that we like wrapping up with all of our guests is, Megan, what is your definition of health?
I love this question. My definition of health is achieving a place within your wellness path where you feel complete acceptance of optimizing your very own lifestyle change, understanding that it takes time to truly incorporate all aspects of wellness: physical, social, mental, spiritual, intellectual, occupational, financial, and environmental, and along the way, emboldening others in their health and wellness journey.
That's cool.
Love it.
I love it. I love that you tied your company name
Had to do
into it. So then,
awesome.
All right, so this is not the last question, but what does embolden mean to you?
I get that a lot, and I like this. It's a good starting question for people. Embolden means basically to inspire, encourage someone to do a habit.
Cool.
So I wanted a powerful name. I didn't really want empower because it's so common nowadays. So when I was looking around names, and Embolden is basically to me a bolder version of empower.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what I want to do is not just like give people education, but I want to inspire wellness in people, and whatever aspect that might be. It might not just be nutrition. So that's really why I named it that.
Very cool. Well, that's wonderful.
I love throughout, as you're talking, I know you had all your points on the details, but something that was consistent within the whole interview and talking was habits and the actions. And so many times we go to like results fitness or results nutrition, and it's like, results are great, but the thing that really, I believe, changes your life, changes your nutrition, changes your health, is going to be the actions and the habits that you create. So I love that. I don't know if you picked up on that, but throughout the whole experience talking today, it's like, how do we create actual change in actions? And I love that. So good for you for helping people do that.
Thank you guys.
Megan, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this was a really great conversation. Like I said, I don't think we've had anybody that's been like truly trained in dietetics or nutrition for that matter. So really thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us. That was wonderful. That was awesome.
Thank you. I had lots of fun, guys. Thank
right
you.
On. Absolutely. So for our listeners, who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that needs to connect with Megan and find out more about the work she is doing? Share this episode with them. And while you're at it, head on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review, because it allows others who are trying to find this kind of information to find us easier. And it makes such a difference when you do that. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.